It's our privilege in this next piece to have a discussion and really to sit kind of family style. For me to sit family style with two men that I greatly admire. The first is Dave Hutchins, the director of the Genesis Institute, and the second is, you prayed earlier, but Dr. Keith Krell, who's the senior pastor at Fourth Memorial Church. He's also a professor at Moody Bible Institute. So what we wanted to talk about as we sit down is just, what is the Genesis Institute, and why is it important, and what's really the heart behind it, and what's going on, kind of those basic questions. So as we start, that's where we're headed. I was thinking, gentlemen, as we listened to Carol Ann's story, there were a couple, almost three parts to it. So the first part was, what is a world like without the Genesis Institute? What is a world like with the Genesis Institute? And next, what's a world like with more of the Genesis Institute? Carol Ann's description of the pathways. So I'd like to just talk about that with the three, have the two of you talk about that. So first of all, with, or without, with, and more. So Keith, what's the world like without the Genesis Institute?
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. This evening I arrived at about 5, and I got to walk around the facilities, and I noticed all the tables and the ministries and the churches and the businesses that are represented here this evening. And I couldn't help but think, you all understand the life of a pastor. You have sympathy and perhaps empathy for men serving in the local church and women serving in the local church. And so for myself, I've been in pastoral ministry for 26 years. My wife added up, we had to figure it out, okay, 17 years of education past high school. So a lot of education. But I don't say that to impress anyone, but to tell you, I've had two counseling classes in those 17 years. And yet in the 26 years I've been a pastor, I've had to deal with domestic abuse, pedophilia, rape, suicide, homosexuality, eating disorders, and even cannibalism. There isn't any behavior or vice I probably haven't had to deal with in my pastoral counseling experience. But as you now know about me, I know just enough about counseling to be dangerous. 2 classes. So obviously, I desperately need a ministry partner. I need a ministry that can help me in my weakness and in my own personal inadequacies. And for Fourth Church and for Moody Bible Institute and for myself as a pastor, Genesis Institute and Dave Hutchins and his staff have been that for us. Dave, I was thinking this evening, maybe we can just step back for a moment, and I'm particularly curious to know more about where your passion for soul care first developed.
Pastor Keith, I want to just say that I am one of the most deeply troubled people I've ever met. I am the most unlikely person in the world to be up here, Keith. I come from a 4th-generation atheist family. I'm on the other side of the tracks. I love my mom and dad. They've been deceased for a number of years. But what I was really aware of, Keith, is just the brokenness of my family, the desperation that my sister and I felt as we were struggling our way through. And what I really was aware of last night when I was struggling with this, so we're taking a little bit of an aside from the script, but it's so important to me because there are such struggles that people are going through. I have the faces of people in high school from me that had fallen away. I have people in my just face after face after face came last night. I have people that when my wife and I married in our early 20s that ended up, only 3 of the 10 of us are still together, and one of those couples that are at our table right now. Some of our dearest friends that have been long-term soul care friends for us over many, many years. And I think all of those things have caused a deepening desire in me in terms of the training with Larry Crabb, Dan Allender. It provided a context to be able to look at the soul and look at what is going on in people deep in the core. Because how many of you are aware people are troubled? How many of you are troubled? All of us are, because Jesus said, in this world you will have what? Trouble. And that means restless disquiet of soul. That's one of the translations of it. I think that's a beautiful translation of what people are going through in the world right now. So all of that has really led to birthing Genesis. Now it's been 23 years plus, and we are thrilled to be here and to have this group and to have Carol Ann talk so beautifully about her story. She is the reason why we do what we do, Keith.
Yeah.
So
Wow, that is powerful. I'm so glad we discussed the issue of soul care because that's what Genesis has really become known for in our community and throughout the world. Let's go back and revisit the original question. What would a world without Genesis be like?
Keith, I would say that in a sense, every person we meet is a world without Genesis. Everyone has a need of the soul that oftentimes is not being addressed. One of the things that we're aware of is this brokenness we're talking about, and ultimately kind of Band-Aid therapy. What we do is we put Band-Aids on things. We even give well-intentioned but misguided words. We use Scripture, but we don't take a look at the brokenness that also is underneath that. So Carol Ann eloquently talked about that, the brokenness that she felt that was real. And we live in a horribly broken world. One of the examples that I like is I'm going to call a guy that I worked with years ago, a guy named John. John was in his 30s. He was a very productive guy. He was engaged with a lot of life. His reputation was growing. His knowledge of his career was growing. Family, wife, children, all of these things were mushrooming larger and larger. And yet he comes in saying, I'm on top of everything, and yet I feel like I'm falling apart. I'm on the verge of panic attacks. And he said, I don't know how to be a man. The issue wasn't fundamentally his gender. It wasn't just those sort of issues. What really was going on was there was a deepening in him that was broken. He focused on his outer world. His outer world was all of the energy, and what he did not focus on was that small place on the inside of him. So he lived what we would call is a hurried life. And hurry, Dallas Willard would say, is a destroyer of the soul. We live in a fast pace, got to get it together, next step, got to keep moving on. And how many of you are weary and burdened in this world? Jesus said we are. In this world, all you are weary and burdened, come to me and I will give you rest. And rest what? For your souls. For the deepest part of you. And so if the soul is left unrecognized, then that hurried condition is going to continue to work at destroying it. And that's going to put us in a really bad place. And that's what was happening with my guy that came, that he was not dealing with the issues of his soul. And it wasn't only if you do that, will you ultimately have restoration. David said, he restores my soul. So God is wanting to restore the soul of who we are, but we have to be willing to go into those places. And Carol Ann talked about what that process looks like.
That's a beautiful, beautiful descriptions of what a world looks like without the Genesis Institute. The next question that I'd like to talk about is really, what does the world look like with the Genesis Institute? What does that mean for you, Dave?
Wendy, I think what that means to me, when I think about that, I think about John as being representative of all of us in different kind of ways. Because all Christians, sadly, we tend to focus on that outer world. And what Dallas Willard, a well-known Christian philosopher that I think has one of the most beautiful descriptions of the soul in terms of what it really means. I'm going to read this to you because I think this is just powerful. And he says this, why is there such deep value and mystery to your existence? And all of us must ask that question. What is the deep value? And here's sort of a nice, succinct operational definition of the soul. The really deep reason is because of this tiny, fragile, vulnerable, precious thing about you called your soul. You are not just a self, you are a soul. The Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed life into his nostrils, the breath of life, and man became a living soul. You're a soul made by God, made for God, made to need God, which means you are not meant to be self-sufficient, which translates, we're made to run on God. And when we put different fuel in that tank, that thing conks out. We just begin to fall apart. And those are things that we see going on a regular basis in terms of the people that are wrestling, as Carol Ann was talking, with their own unique story. And if it's not organic, those are going to be the areas that are going to be important for us. John ignored his soul. When he ignored it, and it was like weeds that just began to morph on the inside. And the pressure of that outer world was collapsing that small inner world that had not been addressed, and it was just crushing him on the inside, which causes people to begin to drift. And people don't just fall away, they begin to fade away. C.S. Lewis was asked, out of 100 people, he said, very few of them will be reasoned out of their faith. They just simply drift away. They just drift away. Like it was at Casting Crowns, it's a slow fade. Wow. A slow fade. And that's exactly what happens when our soul is not taken care of. And what I like is sort of that sinkhole syndrome. How many of you are aware of sinkholes? That all of a sudden everything looks fine, and then a house collapses and people die in it. Shopping malls begin to fall apart. A used car or a new car dealership, half of the display room crashes. And that's because what was underneath was the pressure and all the heat, the pressure, and then finally, great is the collapse. And that's what was happening with John. That's what happens with all of us if we're really not paying attention to those places. And we believe that that is an incredibly important area, loving God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your mind, all of your strength. And we don't address the soul very well. And no wonder that we're struggling. We don't address the inner world issues. And Willard and Crabb and all the ones that I've appreciated, that's the world that really matters. That's the one that really is going to have the biggest impact.
Keith, what do you think? A world with the Genesis Institute. What does that mean for you as a pastor?
Yeah, as a busy pastor, I'm blessed having a wonderful executive pastor, Pastor Scott Liddell, who's received extensive training from Genesis. And we have a wonderful staff. We have great elders and deacons and ministry leaders. But at our church, we don't have enough hands that can do the ministry of counseling. So my first instinct is to meet with anyone and everyone once, at least once, and then say, you know what? I'd like to refer you to the best counseling institute I know of. And they're close in proximity to our church. And Dave and Kathy Hutchins actually attend our church, so we can really vouch for them. And so I like to encourage people within the body of Fourth, people within the body of Moody Bible Institute, to check out Genesis Institute. And my reasons are really simple. First and foremost, they have incredible experience, not just in counseling, but in church ministry. They are practitioners in the local church. So Dave and Kathy, they have 35 years of invaluable ministry experience. You can't beat that. Not in counseling ministry, because they have experience in the local church and in the parachurch world. Another great example would be our very own Katrina Mason. I love Tim and Katrina Mason. And Katrina came to me just a while back and said, Keith, now that my kids are growing up, I would like to volunteer to serve at Fourth Church, and I want to use my counseling and offer you maybe 10 or 15 hours a week. And I was so excited. I was so thrilled. I was salivating. And then shortly thereafter, Katrina told me, oh, Keith, I was offered a job by Genesis Institute. And your natural tendency is to want to say, oh, run me through, Katrina. But the reality is, nothing made me happier. Because now one of the best went to work for the best counseling institute that I know of, nationally even. I'm so grateful for the ministry of Genesis Institute. Secondly, their education. Education is important to me, and I know for many of you, it's important to you as well. Dave has studied under the best of the best. He's studied under Drs. Crabb and Allender. The rest of the staff and administration, they've studied under great people. They've read widely. They have the top-notch degrees. And education and experience are important, but so is excellence. The standard of Genesis, in terms of the excellence with which they do things, is just incredible. I've told Dave multiple times, in all my years of ministry and growing up in a home where my dad was the chairman of the elders and my mom was a deaconess, knowing church and church ministry my entire life, I have never seen a church or any type of parachurch do ministry with the excellence of Genesis Institute. Even the work that Linda has done for year after year, planning these events, dedicating her time to making tonight possible, and then an event like this that's done with such technical excellence, that shows you the type of counseling that I believe you'll receive. And then just two more items. When it comes to a world with Genesis, you've got people of character that you can trust. And I know for myself, I trust Dave with my life. I've entrusted the lives of my family members. I've entrusted my own pastoral life and my own individual personal life to Dave. And Dave knows things about me and our family that next to no one knows. I know I can trust his character, but I can also trust his confidentiality. I know that Dave and Kathy, they're never going to give Lori and me up. And that means I can say to anyone at Fourth, anyone at Moody, Go to the Genesis Institute. You can trust them with their lives, and they will ensure that you receive the healing that you need.
Dave, a little bit earlier, Carol Ann touched on one aspect of the Genesis Institute, which is counseling, and an aspect that you can pray for as well, which is the sliding scale. What are the other 4 aspects that the Genesis Institute has or offers to the community and really the globe?
Wendy, I think a lot of it, one of the things I wanted to kind of back up just a sec with is that we really are a ministry that really wants to bless. We're a ministry of blessing. That fundamentally is really who we are. We believe that projecting good into the lives of other people on an intentional basis, not random acts of goodness, but intentional, prayerful goodness is something God wants all of us to do because the soul longs to be blessed. We long to have a sense of flourishing. But I think the other ones that when I think about really our ministry overall, it really is, we have the biblical counseling, which obviously that we're talking about right now. That's a significant part of what we're doing. And Keith, thank you for your very kind words.
Oh, my pleasure.
You're a guy that I've come to love very much and just appreciate your candor and your truthfulness. But that's a big part of what we do. Obviously, the wanting to reach people at some very personal levels. Dr. Krell would call it very focused discipleship in terms of what we're really looking with in terms of anxiety and those many, many issues. And we've counseled over 8,000 to 9,000 hours over the course of the years. That's a huge amount of time and huge amounts of working with people in terms of numbers of people, and then tens of thousands of hours on top of all of those. So that's a big part. Secondly, core concepts in biblical mentoring. That really is a part that we do on the training side, working closely with you at Moody Bible Institute and Keith as well, because we believe that understanding people, understanding problems, and understanding how do you lead people on a path of sanctification. What does it really look like to really grow? And to have the soul really being taken care of. The Moody Partnership also fits in with that very nicely. This is our 16th year that we've been partnering with Moody. And when Jack asked, your main guy asked, one of the things that really struck me was, he said, Dave, you're an institute, we're an institute, why would you not want to partner together? Yeah. It's like, you have me on that one. That yes, because we want to be able to do that, to be able to train those leaders that we're really wanting to be able to reach. Courageous parenting, as you've seen and what Carol Ann talked about, Dr. Stanley, that's a big part of what we're doing as well too. Wanting to be able to help families in terms of influence and being able to speak life in terms of their godly discipline. How do those two streams go together in meaningful ways that's artfully, skillfully, prayerfully done? That's a big part. Spiritual formation is another part that we're doing as well too. And really wanting to help people care for their own souls, because we don't do a very good job with that. So that big crushing outer world tends to collapse on people, and we're wanting people to learn to do that in very intentional ways. We have one of our board members has been involved with 7 or 8 years with us developing that, writing curriculum. We have a new women's ministry as well that really is dealing with the women's issues in terms of their unique challenges of just being women living in this world, men living in this world. So all of those are big parts of what we do. And really the leadership training is certainly a part of all that as well too. So how do we begin to do that? So those are kind of some significant areas.
That is significant. That's a lot. That's a lot of work, Dave.
Yeah.
Well, as we think in our kind of our final question, what does the world look like with more of the Genesis Institute?
I would say, Wendy, when I think of that, it was really interesting when I was looking at the way we broke this down more, because 8 years ago, excuse me, we were struggling with, do we leave the ministry where it is and let it sort of end with the existing staff? Or do we take a risk and really go forward and believe that God is doing something and wants to do something more? And we struggled with months with that, our board struggled with it, I struggled with it, and finally, sort of just into my heart, I felt God was saying, I want more. Genesis is capable of more. And so when I was looking at the note again, it's like, that was the word. That was really the word that the Lord gave to me and really gave to our board, to want to be able to say that we want it to be sustaining, we want it to be impactful, we want it to continue with what we're doing. So that's a big part. We want to reach the whole world. Certainly Dr. Stanley that we see right there in terms of Kenya, working with parents, having their own book publishing there is like the coolest thing in the world for us to see. The face cover was just amazing to be able to see that. And also to be able to begin to develop online classes. We're still working, that's going to take time and energy, but that's something we want to be able to do to really have it be wherever it is. So developing classes online. Locally, we're drawing from roughly a 100-mile radius just in terms of where people are coming from, because they're wanting, like Carol Ann said, biblical direction, They're wanting biblical help in terms of training to be able to help people. We want to be able to do that, reaching that next generation. And one of the things that I'm excited about is reaching the next generation. Keith, you and I have talked a lot about, that's a lot of the mission of Fourth, that's the mission of Moody as well. There was what I kind of conclude my little part here was about 4 weeks ago in Moody class, there was a young pastor in training named Ben sitting in the back row, second from the left, his normal spot, and he's very bright, very intellectual, and we'd been reading on the soul and talking about the soul and about the integration that Dr. Willard talked about that was up on that screen. And all of a sudden I'm sitting there and we're 5 minutes to end of class and I watch Ben slowly raise his hand as I'm talking and he just leaves it there. And it's like, this guy is not going to put that hand down. I'm going to have to respond to this. And I said, do you have a question there? He goes, no, more of a comment. The comment is, that thing about soul integration, your outer and your inner world, integrating, really becoming more whole and flourishing and healing. He said, that's a big word. He said, that's cool thinking about my life and being able to minister to other people. Now, what I was aware of was the blessing that I felt when he said that. There was a deep sense of penetration, and I felt rest in just a split second. And I remember my next words were, bless you, brother, bless you for what you're doing and for what you represent. So those are, when I think of more, Wendy, that really is the picture.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Keith, when you think of more, what does that mean for you as a churchman?
Yeah. First, Dave, let me just say once again, thank you for all that you've done and for all the ministries, not just counseling, but equipping and leadership training that has spanned the world, not just Spokane. You have been used by God in a powerful way, and we are so thankful for you in Genesis. I think the story I referred to earlier with Katrina Mason really draws a picture of what I would want you to know. Because I love Tim and Katrina, and because I think I serve on the best staff possible, I love the people I serve with. We see the needs in our church and in our community, and we see the need to partner with Genesis. So when Katrina came to me and she said, Keith, I want to be a person of integrity. What do you think? This job has been offered to me. I said I would be willing to serve you. As Katrina and I had discussed it, there was no decision to be made. We wanted to cooperate. We wanted to partner with Genesis because we knew if we shared Katrina and if Katrina took her abilities and gifts and used them for God's glory, she would impact far more people through Genesis Institute than she would even if she served just at Fourth. I liken Genesis Institute to a power tool. I mean, you can use a manual screwdriver, you can use any number of tools, but when Genesis Institute comes into your church, your business, your parachurch ministry, it's like having power tools. And every man, and in my case, my wife, loves power tools. I mean, we love power tools for what they will do for us. Well, can you imagine having power tools in ministry? So when I think of what Genesis offers and what Dave has just shared with us, think about the opportunities you may have for your staff, for your elders and deacons to receive further training, that they might be empowered and enabled to serve the Lord with excellence, to not just touch the needs in your local church or your parachurch or your business, but to then impact their neighborhood, their schools, their county. What a privilege. And what about even considering what role our churches and our businesses and our parachurches can play in financially partnering with Genesis? There are occasions where churches do receive gifts and businesses do have excess funds. Wouldn't it be great if we blessed Genesis with some of the wealth that the Lord brings in to our business or into our ministry? Or perhaps you would say, let's just simply include Genesis in our annual budget. We will include them, give them their own budget line, and we can commit ourselves to partnering with Genesis in a practical and in a powerful way. At the end of the day, do you know what Genesis wants? I know because I've talked to Dave about it many times. They want all of us to pray as individuals, as churches, as parachurches, as businesses, that we would pray for Genesis even daily. And now that they are providing us the resources this evening, it's easier than ever to pray for Genesis. So Dave, I'm so thankful for your friendship, for your partnership, for the opportunity that we've had to get to know each other. Lori and I always say, we just love Dave and Kathy. We love them so much, and it's your infectious, contagious passion, along with Kathy and the staff that you've raised up, and the people who believe in Genesis, who have made Genesis what it is today. So Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. One thing I love is what Pastor Keith mentioned, that you're sitting here as an individual, but as we think about the organizations that you're a part of and the businesses and the churches and the ministries that you're a part of, we'd ask you to consider, is there a way to bring that organization into partnership with Genesis, whether it's leadership training or soul care, some aspect of that, which Dave mentioned the resources that they have. What does that look like for the place where you work or the places where you live, the ministries that you're involved in? That'd be one aspect that we'd ask you to consider praying for tonight.